Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Hormones podcast. I'm your host, Sheridan Decker, and today I have the privilege of speaking to Jessie. So, Jessie provides video courses and coaches for clients to master their fertility with ease, and she works at somewhere called Fertility Charting. So, you guys may or may not have heard of Jessie before, but thank you so much for jumping on today.
Thank you, Sheridan. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to talk all things fertility.
Well, it's cool because I'm in the gut health space, right? But obviously there's always links to the hormonal stuff. And one of the key questions I always do get asked is about people going, do I have to come off the pill? And it's not even my niche. It's an area obviously I support, but it's not my niche, right? But these kind of fertility questions come up so often, and it's just, I don't know, I feel like there's not enough information about it. But when you're in the space of it, I feel like there is, and you would feel like there is, but then we're in the minority. Like most people actually don't know a lot about fertility and charting and things.
It's so true. And like you say, I am 100% in a bubble. I live in this happy little bubble of fertility awareness. And I just assume that the whole world is like that. And sadly, it's just absolutely not. Like there's such a lack of research and education out there for people who are interested in natural fertility management. And like you say, it really overlaps with so many different modalities and practitioners, because when people want to come off the pill, it's kind of like they're almost faced with a black hole of where to next and what information can I trust and what do I do now? So yeah, there absolutely is a lack of info out there.
What made you come into this space then? Because obviously, for me, and I find this with most practitioners, it was like I had all these chronic gut symptoms for 10 years. So it was a natural, I want to feel better and I want other people to feel better. Therefore, this is the space I'm going to go into. Was this around your own fertility or hormonal journey, or just something that you went, hey, women aren't being empowered enough? This is going to be my passion.
Yeah, so such a good question. It really, I feel as though I got catapulted into this field. If you had asked me back in 2011, where do you see yourself in a decade or 15 years, I would never in a million years have said fertility awareness. I had absolutely no idea about ovulation, the menstrual cycle, fertility, absolutely no idea. And not only I had no idea, but I had no interest. It just wasn't on my radar. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I got into a long-term relationship for the first time. And at the time, I was not on hormonal birth control and we were relying on condoms. But when you're in a long-term relationship, condoms are not really what you want to be relying on forever and ever. And so it actually led me towards taking some more risky behaviors that resulted in me having to go to the chemist and get the morning after pill twice in the span of about 6 months. And that really messed up my hormones. I had a lot of side effects from the morning after pill. And I just was thinking to myself, I can't keep doing that. It's irresponsible and risky, and I don't want to get pregnant. So I went to my GP and I said, look, I'm in a long-term relationship. I don't want to be using condoms every single time, but I also really don't want to be on the pill. What are my options? And my GP literally said, your options are either the pill or an IUD or an insertable, or literally relying on condoms for the rest of your life. And I think I remember very vividly that feeling of helplessness. Like, what do I do? Like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And that specific moment and that feeling has really driven me in a lot of what I do, which is raising awareness, because I don't want other people to feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so once I went on the pill, I had a bad experience. I eventually came off the pill and discovered what is called the Symptothermal Method, which is basically naturally managing your fertility. And it just revolutionized my life. It changed so many facets of my life and my health, my well-being. And it's really driven me to share the info, because back in 2016, the internet there was really nothing in Australia about fertility awareness or the Symptothermal Method. It truly was a black hole. It's much better now, but it's something I continue to be, really passionate about.
I love that because I actually feel like that lines up with kind of this gut health progression as well, in the sense that there's this hopelessness, this frustration, this feeling like there's nothing, there's nowhere else to go when you're at the GPs. And that's a really big part of it as well, is people not knowing. But also, you're right, this progression. Like if I look back to, like is 7, 8 years ago in the gut health space, there was nothing in there. And I feel exactly the same with the fertility stuff, because a lot of females you probably talk to and I talk to have been on some kind of contraceptive journey with the pill or IUD or Mirena or whatever, simply because either they're controlling symptoms or they're in the same space that you were, going, I want to have unprotected sex. I'm in a healthy relationship. I feel secure and safe and happy doing that, but I'm not ready to have a baby yet. So what do I do? Like, I feel like there's, like I said, there was that real lack, or still is that real lack and gap in the market there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more you speak to people, the more you realize it's such a common experience going to the GP and just not really given many options, and then kind of being left to figure things out on your own.
Yeah. So, what is our option? This is the big one here. So, we know that you're certified thermal method instructor. So, your sort of passion is around natural birth control, natural conception, health tracking, those kinds of things. But for those who don't know, because I'm going to just say 90% of the women probably actually don't, unless they've stalked you prior to the podcast. But what is the symptothermal method?
All right. So the symptothermal method is a way of monitoring your fertility so that you know when you are fertile and when you are not fertile. And then you can use that information to enjoy unprotected sex without fear of pregnancy. Or on the other side, you can use that information to help you time sex to conceive, to reduce the time it takes to fall pregnant. And then you can also use that information to monitor your hormonal health. And you can do those three things across the different phases of your reproductive life cycle. So it's very versatile depending on what you need. But if we take a step back and just say, okay, well, what is the symptothermal method, and what does it mean to know when we are fertile and when we're not fertile? We need to take a step back and have a think about the menstrual cycle. So when we think about the menstrual cycle, we have obviously our period, which is really obvious. We're losing blood and it's a really obvious event. But we also have ovulation, and ovulation is a much more silent or hidden event that a lot of us don't think about. But ovulation is when our ovaries release an egg, and the egg that we release actually only has a fertilizable lifespan of around 24 hours. So on our own, we're not fertile for very long throughout the menstrual cycle because we only ovulate once. And then if we kind of take a step back to the bigger picture, if we're preventing pregnancy, we're usually in a relationship with someone who's producing sperm. Now, sperm can survive up to 5 to 7 days in the reproductive tract. So when we combine the lifespan of sperm with the lifespan of the egg, we really only have this small window. It's about 6 to 9 days every menstrual cycle where we can fall pregnant. And that's known as the biological fertile window. So that in itself can be a huge shock to people, because if you're anything like me, I was not aware of that. And I grew up really thinking that I was fertile, like constantly. So that in itself can be really mind-blowing information for a lot of people. But when we talk about how we know when we're fertile and when we're not fertile, what we actually do is we track things called fertility biomarkers. So fertility biomarkers are outward signs of what our body is doing on the inside, our internal biology. And we track two key fertility biomarkers. We track cervical mucus and basal body temperature. So to explain it a little bit more, we have two phases of our menstrual cycle. So in the lead up to ovulation, so from the first day of your period up until you ovulate, that's your follicular phase. And during that phase of the cycle, estrogen is your dominant hormone. And then we ovulate, and between ovulation and your next period, there's an approximate 2-week time span. That's called the luteal phase. And during the luteal phase, progesterone is your dominant hormone. Now, these hormones do different things and cause changes in our fertility biomarkers. So in the lead up to ovulation, We're going to see our cervical mucus changing and developing. It's going to change from maybe sticky and tacky at the end of your period through to becoming moist and milky and creamy, lotiony, right through to really high levels of water content. Becomes much more wet and slippery and clear and stretchy and abundant. And then after we ovulate, it dries up quite abruptly. And then once we get into the luteal phase, progesterone is dominant, our core temperature rises. So what we do is we look at these two fertility biomarkers. They can tell us when we are approaching ovulation and when we have passed ovulation. And so using a chart where we track these changes, we can essentially predict when we're fertile and when we're not with a very high level of accuracy, and use that info to prevent pregnancy naturally.
I love all of that. And I've definitely, whose book was it? Oh, Lisa Hendricks Jacks is a big sort of leader in this space. I've had her on the podcast before, and she's incredible. And I think that's when I first sort of started learning about it. And then, I've obviously followed and looked at your content for a while. But I think there's a couple of things going on there that I want to unpack. One is people get overwhelmed with tools and resources, right? We get so stuck in like, what app, what tools, what temp tracking, what like that stuff, that I actually think that's how it gets so overwhelming, right? Like, because all of a sudden you go, there are so many apps, there's so many options, there's so many, and they go, I can't do it. And it's like, it's quite an easy tap out. So in one sense, I see the benefit of, working with yourself or doing one of your courses or something along those lines, because you, I'm going to assume, map it out quite clearly then and say, here's the app I want you to use, or here's this, or some people even, I don't know, like Lisa used to have people still drawing it out as well when handwriting it out. But apps and the things like Daisy or what's the other one? The one that's...
Or Natural Cycles.
Natural Cycles, Temp Drop, all those things make it so much easier. So what is your pick around those things or stance on those things? Do you have things you love or don't love in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's so much I could dive into. I don't even know where to start. I think what I would say is this is really the value of working with an instructor, because we're qualified to basically map out a pathway for you so that you can chart your cycle in the safest way for you. When we talk about apps, there's one app that I recommend to all of my clients if they don't want to paper chart. So I actually am a big fan of paper charting because it helps cement that whole learning process. But if you don't like, writing things out on paper, then there's one app that I recommend, and that's the Read Your Body app, which is a fantastic app. When we talk about apps in general, we want our app to be like a digital paper chart. So we don't want our app to be giving us predictions, because we've got studies showing that the predictions that these apps give us aren't necessarily the safest and aren't necessarily very accurate. So if you are, for example, you've got a serious need to prevent pregnancy and you are like, I just can't get pregnant, it's not an option right now, then relying on app predictions is just a really bad idea. So I recommend steering clear of relying on an app. It's all about learning how the method works yourself so that you can interpret your own chart in the safest way possible. And then in terms of charting tools, it is really overwhelming. But if anyone is feeling unsure, I have a whole section on my website called Charting Tools, and you can browse through there and see what I recommend and what's going to be a good option for you. So that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I just found like exactly what you said. Like I use the Kindara app because I can pop my temps in and then see my mucus changes and see all that stuff. And that's only purely from when I chatted to Lisa, and that was a couple of years ago in a sense. But you do, when you can see it like that, and I'm a newbie in this space, but when I could actually see it, I was like, oh, like, and it'd be the same as paper charting would be amazing. Actually, now I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that, because you're right. It's a learning, growing process, and you start to understand and pick up those things in your body more and more, I guess. And again, one of those things where working with someone like yourself takes away all that guesswork out of it, especially if there is stuff going on with your cycle. I'm assuming like if there's irregular ovulation, or you're trying to prevent contraception, or you're trying to fall pregnant, or you really want to understand your body, like you do gain a lot more of that knowledge working with someone as opposed to you end up in this whole world of guesswork, which can be quite overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely. And you see that a lot in the online, like fertility spaces, like Facebook groups and Reddit forums and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people out there trying to teach themselves, and it can be very chaotic. Two things I would say is if you do want to paper chart, I have free paper charts that you can download on my website. And that is really helpful because I've designed them to just make things a little bit simpler. And also the Kandara app. So I used to love the Kandara app. But just to let you know, is that I there is a chance I think that they could disappear off the app store and you could lose your data. Yeah, it's a whole big thing. But from my understanding, and I could be wrong, but their company sold to like another company a few years back, and their like I think like Zendesk customer support service completely shut down, and I don't think they do updates anymore in the app store, and it's kind of like this big
That
weird
makes sense
thing.
because and this is
Yeah.
sorry to run for this total side rant, but I've had clients where I've said, oh, yeah, use Kindara because you can see everything. I can put my temps in and all that stuff. And then they're like, I can't get it or I can't download it or it's not letting me. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about because mine's fine. But
Yeah.
it's,
That's it. I think it may not even be available in the app store anymore. And so I highly recommend for anyone who's using Hidara is go to their online portal, like you log in on desktop and you can download all of your data, because I just have this bad feeling like it would suck so much to lose like years of data from Kindara. So I recommend everyone does do that. And then if you do need, like for your clients, if they're looking for an app, then the Read Your Body app is a fantastic choice.
yeah.
It does require a small annual subscription. So it's not free. If you need a free app, then there's also a great app called Lutea, Lutea. But it's a lot more basic than the Read Your Body app, but it does the job if you just need something really basic.
Yeah, because it's cool when you can, because a lot of them now, like a lot of the girls use the aura rings, and that connects to natural cycles or whatever.
Yeah. Don't get me started on natural cycles.
Yeah, because I had questions about that with someone the other day when they're like, I love my aura ring and I use natural cycles and bits and pieces, but I've never, because I haven't been into it, I don't actually know what it does or how accurate it is or anything like that. But I'm assuming if someone is using the aura ring, that's giving the temp reading across. Is that what it's going on?
So the Aura Ring, I actually tested it out for a fair few months, like last year, I think it was. And the Aura Ring is actually great. But what it does is in the Aura app, it only gives you like a temperature fluctuation from a baseline. So it'll say, plus 0.4 or minus 0.2. Just to show like if your temperature is higher or lower than your usual baseline. So it doesn't give you an actual temperature value. And you need an actual temperature value if you want to chart with the symptothermal method. And so what's happened is that Natural Cycles has teamed up with Aura, and basically to get that absolute temperature value, you've got to also have a Natural Cycles app subscription so that you can you can sync through the Aura ring to get your actual temperature value. And a few things I would say. So number one, I absolutely don't recommend relying on natural cycles for pregnancy prevention, especially if you're using aura temperatures, which are from your finger. There's a whole range of reasons why. And I'm mindful I don't want to take up your entire podcast here talking about this, but I'll try and give like a very brief overview. So number one, if you're relying on temperatures alone, you should know that your temperature generally only rises after you've already ovulated. So it stays risen during the 2 weeks from ovulation to your next period. However, it doesn't give you any advance warning that you're getting closer to ovulation. And you need advance warning to know that you're about to ovulate to stop having unprotected sex, because sperm can live 5 to 7 days in the vagina or in the reproductive tract. So if you're relying on temperature only data, you're using natural cycles. They are actually using their algorithm, which is based on your past cycles and the data of other people around the world, like population-based data out of the app, to give you an estimate as to when is the earliest that you might ovulate. And then they like subtract however many days back to say, okay, stop having sex now after the period ends, to make sure that there's no sperm present when you ovulate. The problem with this is that we're humans and we're not robots, and it's a prediction, and it's an app that isn't living in your body. It's not intimately connected with your life. And there are a lot of things that can cause you to ovulate sooner or later than you would usually. So it does present an issue if you unexpectedly ovulate early or earlier than expected, because your temperature isn't going to tell you that. It only rises after you've already ovulated. So that's number one to be aware of. Look, if you are pretty cruisy about unattended pregnancy, then it could work fine for you. But if you're someone who's got that really strong need to prevent pregnancy, then it's not a good idea. The second thing is if you're using the Aura ring, from my understanding and the studies I've seen, the Aura ring can actually result in giving you temperature shifts earlier than you would with an oral basal body temperature thermometer. So that means that it becomes slightly less safe on top of all of that.
Yeah.
So that's just my advice is, if you've got a really serious need to prevent pregnancy, you really don't want to get pregnant, then I don't recommend relying solely on the Natural Cycles app or solely on the Natural Cycles app with the Aura ring. However, if you're a bit more relaxed about it and it wouldn't be such a bad thing, like maybe you're thinking of trying later in the year anyway, then that's totally a different story. So there's actually more info on my website if you want to dive into that a little bit more, but it's a big topic.
That's super interesting. I'm stoked you brought that up and break that down, because I do get asked it a lot. And obviously I have no idea really. And I know a lot of women inside my program do wear the Aura ring, and it is pretty accurate, but they're kind of just using it to track their cycles for health, right? They're not trying to fall pregnant or trying to prevent it specifically. It's kind of just a general guidance of what's going on with my body. Have I skipped a period or something like that kind of stuff? But you're right, like to get that more data, which then makes me wonder, because obviously you can track your temp fingers or a ring, or temp drop, which is upper arm, or you're using BBT, basal body temp thermometer, in your mouth. Is the oral one the most accurate one then?
Yeah. So there's so much to say here. So yes. So basically, two things. I'm just going to really quickly backtrack to talking about the Aura ring. If you don't want to have to use the Natural Cycles app to get an absolute temperature value, you can literally just set your own baseline and do a calculation every day to be like, okay, I'm going to say my baseline's always 36 degrees Celsius. If Aura is plus or minus however much, I'll just add or subtract that. So that can save you money on an unnecessary Natural Cycles subscription. Now, when we talk about what's actually accurate, so when we talk about contraceptive effectiveness estimates and the fertility awareness method or the symptothermal method, the gold standard for correct use is an internal temperature, whether that's your mouth, your vagina, or even the anus. So I don't know many people who are using breast thermometers these days. Thankfully, most of us are pretty okay with the oral thermometer. But those are the gold standard, like those have been studied for their impact on effectiveness. So anything outside of that could have an impact on the contraceptive effectiveness of the method. So if you're using the temp drop or the Aura ring or the Apple Watch, we actually don't know how those might impact the safety of the symptothermal method for contraception. What I will say is that I've tested a fair few devices now. So I've tested the Aura ring, the Apple Watch, the temp drop. I tested a Fitbit Inspire 3-band and an Arbor bracelet, and I compared them all. And out of them, the temp drop came up as most accurate, with the Aura and the Apple Watch a close second. So I think it really comes down to making choices that align with what's important to you as an individual charter. So for people who are just a bit more cruisy and relaxed around things, then it's totally fine to opt for those things that make your life easier. Like it's so much nicer not having to wake up every morning and take a temp, and that's totally valid. It's just being aware of the fact that that might impact the effectiveness. So yeah, it's all about weighing up pros and cons.
And I think that ties in perfectly to my next question, which is, well, if we're not, quote unquote worried about being pregnant or not pregnant, like we kind of are going with a little bit of a looser look at this, why are we tracking then? So what kind of things, because I know charting picks up a lot of stuff. If I came to you and said, pregnant, like I'm not trying to fall pregnant and I'm not specifically trying to prevent it because I'm single, I'm not having sex, whatever, but I want to track my cycles, you'd be able to go, well, cool, you should be tracking your cycles because of ovulation or this benefits or that benefits. Because I think a lot of people get caught up going, well, I'm not trying to have a baby, so who cares what's going on with my cycle, right? Ovulate, don't ovulate, miss a period, it's late, it's early, like whatever. But there's a lot more to it, yeah?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. Like, absolutely, yes, because yeah, it's massive. The things that your chart can tell you about your health are just phenomenal. And from the most basic level, for most of our lives, we've kind of been told fertility only matters if you want to fall pregnant. But the fact is that fertility is the sign of a healthy body, and we want to be fertile and healthy in our reproductive years. So even just looking at our charts, we can check and make sure whether we are ovulating. And if you're not ovulating, then you know that you're not getting the exposure to estrogen in the build up to ovulation and then progesterone after ovulation. And we know that progesterone has massive health benefits for things like brain health, bone health, heart health, mental health, skin and hair, nails, metabolism. Like there's so much thyroid health that goes into it. So simply bleeding every month doesn't actually guarantee that you're ovulating. So seeing blood doesn't guarantee you've ovulated. You really need to be charting to see whether you're seeing that sustained temperature rise with the cervical mucus buildup and then abrupt dry up after ovulation. And so that's probably the first thing I'd say, because every year without fail, I have clients that come to me who are regularly bleeding, but we find out that they're not ovulating. And that's something you want to nip in the bud as soon as you can, because every time we ovulate, we get exposure to progesterone. And I think it's in the words of Lara Briden, I think she's the one who says this, it's like making a deposit into the bank of progesterone for your future health in perimenopause. And there's, I think, Dr. Jerry Lynn Pryor has a lot of work there. But basically, at a very basic level, you want to be ovulating for your health, both now and as you age. And then on top of that, there's so many more things we can dive into. So your temperatures can give you some information about the health of your metabolism and the health of your thyroid. You can look at patterns of spotting across the cycle to check whether there may be issues with things like progesterone or even cervical health or uterine polyps. You can have a look at the length of the luteal phase, because anything less than 10 days is not optimal, and it means that you're not really getting the exposure to progesterone that you need. And in terms of future fertility, could be a problem for conception. Same thing with like the level of temps, where the temps are high enough in the luteal phase, that kind of is reflecting back things about our progesterone levels. And then same with our cervical mucus and our period. Our period itself, are you having really long, heavy bleeds? Are you having really painful bleeds? There's so much that your chart can tell you about things, even like endometriosis. So I would say when we take a step back, the chart it's not a diagnostic tool, right? It can't tell us exactly what's happening, but it can give us some signposts, and it can say, you need to maybe look into investigating your hormone levels or your progesterone levels, or maybe you need to go get a pap smear on your cervix. And then, yeah, so that's probably the main thing I would say, is that charts are not a diagnostic tool, but they are giving us really valuable signposts. And I like to say that our menstrual cycle is like a biofeedback tool. Our charts are a biofeedback tool. So that's what I would say. If you don't need to prevent pregnancy, you're not trying, but you're interested in your health, then charting is absolutely a good idea.
Yeah, I love that. Like I even think of like the Lara Briden stuff just around going, it's like your monthly report card. It's like, hey, what's going on in my life? Am I overdoing it with exercise? Am I not eating enough food? Am I stressed? Is my gut health impacting my nutrients, which is then impacting my hormones, which is then impacting my cycle, which is giving me anxiety? Like it's like this whole, yes, the more we know about our body, the more data we have, the more stuff that's going on, the more you can understand and help yourself and sort of feel better, I guess, essentially, because we do get very, what's the word? I see this with gut health a lot, and I know it's very similar in hormone health, but we get we disassociate. That's what I'm trying to say. We disassociate from our body, and people do that with their gut because they can come in and go, I don't know when I pooed last. I can't remember what my bowel movement was like. I don't know if I'm bloated. And then it's the same with their period. I'm like, well, how long was it? Like, was it heavy? Was it light? What's going on? But because we aren't good at being in tune to our body, and so many women I find when they've been inside my program, they're like, oh, I'm always looking at my poo now, or I'm checking my period, or I'm doing these other things. And it's like, that awareness is just key to how you feel. And it's sad that we're in a society where we do just disassociate. That's my body and that's what's happening. And I don't, put the dots together and go, hey, period, gut, mental health, how are these all connected?
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I think, like you say, it's a massive shame. And it also comes back a little bit to societal taboos around things. Like, we don't like to talk about sex, and there's a lot of shame around the menstrual cycle in many different cultures around the world. And same with poo, bowel movements. There's a lot of societal kind of hush hush and shame around those topics, which at the end of the day, it's so empowering to know how our bodies work and know ourselves better. So yeah, I do hope that we see that change for future generations.
I also think, and you've mentioned this before, but because it doesn't come up in your doctor's visits, like you think back to your first experience where you felt, frustrated and kind of overwhelmed, being like, well, I don't know where to next. And I had the same with my gut, and it's like, well, I don't know where to next. And then it's like, because your option is kind of the birth control pill or laxatives, let's say it's constipation, you're not educated to then go, hey, let's empower you with the knowledge to understand your body. Like, if we can step back and reset that now and start teaching our children that now and sort of pushing that stuff into schools or those kinds of things, or, podcasts, your education, your courses, your awareness, it does shift that whole space, that we don't get that feeling of helplessness going, I don't understand my body, full stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much work to be done in that field, massive work. And going to see a doctor, I mean, I vividly remember just receiving absolutely no information about natural options of fertility management. And I think when you kind of take a step back and look into why that's happening, I think you kind of have to look at the fact that every other contraceptive option that you're going to be offered in the doctor's office has some kind of financial outlay to a pharmaceutical company when you're put on it, except for natural methods of fertility management. So it's like, if no one is financially benefiting, if a pharma company doesn't have a huge vested financial interest, then you're just not hearing about it once you get into the doctor's office, which is a massive shame. But I think in many ways, that's kind of one of the big underlying reasons that we don't hear much about it.
Yeah, yeah. So if women do want to hear more about it, learn more about it, where is the best place to find you? Like, obviously, we've got your website, which I'll link to the show notes for you guys, but it is fertilitycharting.com.au. And you're also on Instagram, fertility charting. How do you work with women? How do you support women? And where can we get more of Jessie?
So come find me. So like you just mentioned, Sheridan, those are the main two places. So my website, fertilitycharting.com.au, and my Instagram, fertilitycharting. And I really have two main ways that I work with clients. So if you are trying for a baby, or if you're trying to prevent pregnancy, then you've got two options. So you can either take one of the self-paced courses that's available, and they are like amazing. They are packed with everything you need to get basically up to speed and start charting within about 4 weeks. And then you've also got the option of individual coaching. So if you really feel like you need some one-on-one support as you learn, then I'm there for that as well. So I basically provide support through WhatsApp messages, voice notes, and Zoom calls for a lot of my clients as we work through the content and the material. So that's the main thing. But then on top of that, I have absolutely packed my website full of free info that's helpful for people, because when I started this journey back in 2016, There was just nothing. Honestly, the internet it was like a barren desert of just really not much, especially in Australia, for the symptothermal method. So you've got things like recommended apps and devices, you've got downloadable paper charts. I've got a big cervical mucus gallery, so you can browse through pictures of cervical mucus to kind of get an idea of what you're looking at and what it might mean. There's an instructor directory where you can browse through other instructors as well. There's a free course which I recommend everyone to take. Actually, I have the funniest story. I work with this wonderful, I have a day job outside of what I do here as well. And I work with this wonderful Polynesian colleague, a guy from New Zealand. And we were talking about it one day, and I was like, "Oh, Tup, like I have a free course you can take to learn," thinking he just would never borrow. But anyway, he took the course, and the next day came into work just rattling off ovulation, cervical mucus, like follicular phase. It's like the follicles are growing, and what does this mean and that mean?
I love that.
I know. So look, if my amazing colleague Tup, who has zero interest in fertility, can learn so much from that course, then I guarantee you'll pick something up too.
I love that. And I think it is one of those things when you've got, and your website is amazing and it does have a lot of those resources, but it just gives that starting point for people like males, females, couples, whatever. You can sit down and work through and go, okay, what's the best fit for me right now? Do the course, do the thing, and start to raise that awareness, and then go, hey, actually, I really want to try for a baby now. Let's get Jessie on board and actually like nail that process. But yeah, you are so generous with your time and the amount of resources you put out there. It's no wonder you got no time for a podcast, like running your
That
own.
explains it, doesn't it?
Exactly. But thank
I'll
you.
just keep coming and visiting you on your podcast.
Journey. I would have you anytime. The amount of information and the way the hormone stuff links into the gut stuff, fertility links into the gut stuff, it's just hand in hand. And I think the more we can raise that awareness to people, the better it is. So I love that, and I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sheridan. I had such a good time talking through everything, and hopefully it's really helpful for your listeners.
Thank you.